Hello and welcome to a new podcast from Loro Parque. Today we are joined by the director of Loro Parque Foundation, Javier Almunia. How are you? Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much.
And today we are going to talk about an issue, which is quite controversial at times. We are going to talk about the scientific truths of marine sanctuaries. Much has been said about them. In fact, various studies have been published lately, among them one in which they questioned the effectiveness of this type of sanctuaries as an optimal solution to improve the well-being of cetaceans living under human care. And for that we have Javier today, who as an expert is one of the most recognized, and we are going to start by getting to know a little bit first. Javier, what is a marine sanctuary?
A marine sanctuary is a kind of enclosed place, let's say, in the sea. A net is placed from the surface to the bottom to prevent the animals from getting out, and specifically a sanctuary for cetaceans, as understood by some animal rights NGOs. Well, it is a place to keep cetaceans where they cannot escape, that is, they are in captivity, where they have limited movement. They can be of different sizes, ranging from 10,000 to 50,000 square meters, and the goal is to place the animals in that place so that they are in more natural conditions and they would be better off than when they are in a dolphinarium. That is a bit of the philosophy, the objective, and the design. The structure of a cetacean sanctuary.
How many sanctuaries are there in the world?
Well, at this moment there is one. Only one is operational.
So there is only one.
There is only one. There is no other. We could almost say zero, due to its limited effectiveness. But strictly speaking, there is only one place that has the permits, that has the infrastructure, that has this net placed, that I was mentioning earlier, that goes from the surface to the bottom and limits the movement of cetaceans, and that is currently operational, in the sense that it has an activity license. The rest of what they talk about are almost always projects that some have been working on for 15 or 20 years, in which it is announced that a sanctuary will be built. It's a very interesting way to get donations, because some of them have received more than $15 million in donations and are still not operational. They doesn't even have the license yet, nor the activity permit. A rigorous and serious study has not been conducted from an oceanographic perspective of how to maintain that network, set it up and then keep it safe, because those who know the sea know that it's not simple to place an infrastructure in the sea that withstands storms, waves, wind, and all the meteorological inclemencies suffered by the coasts of any place on the planet.
So you're telling me that there's only one sanctuary in the world, and the others are just projects where a lot of money has been spent along the way. So, what happens to that money?
Well, I would like to know that. At the moment, what the most advanced does, which is the sanctuary of Nova Scotia, a sanctuary that was originally designed for orcas, and has now become a sanctuary for belugas. I think it's because along the way they realized they weren't going to get orcas, but there's a certain ambiguity. That's the one that has worked the most, and what they have done fundamentally are oceanographic studies. How are the currents in that place, the water quality, and a little about the infrastructure design at a very general level. Not a design from the engineering point of view, to place it next week, but to say, if we draw a line from here to here, there could be a net here, and here we could build a house for the veterinarians, for the staff who will take care of the animals. But everything is at a low level. It's a draft phase design.
So that no one else sells you other stories. What people need to know is that there is only one marine sanctuary. By the way, are there animals in that sanctuary right now?
There are none. That sanctuary, the story is quite long, but it has to do with a company called Sea Life. It is a company that has aquariums in different parts of the world. They have them in Sydney, in London, in Almadina, and this company, from the moment it was created, made a commitment to not keep cetaceans in captivity, something they decided to do. From a business point of view, very legitimate. What happens is that they bought an aquarium in Shanghai that had 2 belugas, It actually had 3. And at the moment they bought it, as they had taken on this commitment, they committed to create a place, a sanctuary to relocate these animals between some things and others. It took them more than 10 years to have it operational. But fortunately, as they are a company that works with animals in captivity, fish, turtles, penguins, well, they know what they are doing, and what they did was build on a small island south of Iceland an aquarium, where they have their fish, Arctic monkfish, different types of wildlife. And then they made some quarantine pools for the belugas. Those were swimming pools intended to be the first step, a temporary thing, until they adapted to the environment. And to be able to have them in the sanctuary, in the bay, which was the main objective. They built this pool, quite small, much smaller than the pool that the belugas had at that time in Shanghai, China. And we are talking about Iceland. It is a completely enclosed space, with no access to the outside, practically no windows, and artificial light. It took these 10 years to build the entire system and prepare the sanctuary. During that period of time, one of the 3 belugas died, leaving 2. They were moved 5 years ago, from China to Iceland by plane, and they announced that from that moment on the way cetaceans are kept under human care would change, and they were going to be truly the revolution, and the installation of the future, the sanctuary. After that, they kept them for about 8 or 10 months until they adapted to the outside temperature, because they lived in a slightly warmer place. When they were considered to be adapted, they were initially placed at an intermediate point. What is a kind of floating cage that does not have access to the bottom? A very limited area like a small cage, but already in the bay. They were there for a few months, and then they were moved to the bay, to the Great Bay, to the sanctuary. They were finally in the sanctuary. But unfortunately, winter arrived, and even though these animals are Arctic animals, that perfectly withstand the temperature and the elements of weather, they said they preferred to place them inside for their safety, and they returned to place them in the small quarantine. From there, a year and a half passed without them being taken back to the bay again, and when they tried it, at the moment they were in the intermediate phase in this floating cage, and one of them was diagnosed with gastric ulcers. That is often an indicator of stress in cetaceans, so they had to put them back in the small quarantine. And since then they have been there. 5 years have passed, the animals are still in quarantine, and they have only spent 70 days in the sanctuary in 5 years. Javier, as a scientist, are you surprised by all this with these animals at that sanctuary? It really surprised me. I have to say that when I started doing the calculations to see the time they had been inside and outside, I thought it was little, but I didn't imagine it was so little. I was surprised that it was really so little. Analyzing the situation carefully, we have to consider that animals under human care, any animal, including cetaceans as well, they are what is called very neophobic. They are afraid of new things. You need a gradual and well-designed adaptation process to be able to modify something in the life of these animals. And even though people think, well, if they go from a pool to a semi-natural place, they will feel better. Well, that's not what happens. What happens is that the animal faces a completely new situation, for which he is not prepared, and that his caregivers have not bothered to build an adaptation protocol. That's why what happens is that animals don't adapt.
What risk does it represent, for example, that animals under the care of people need to be relocated to this type of sanctuary? What risk does it pose for the animals?
Well, for animals, first comes the risk of adapting, which is what we have seen here. They ended up in worse conditions than they started with. The risk of them escaping, and that seems to be something positive and beneficial, but it's not because, first, they are not capable of surviving, and even in the event that they were able to survive in nature and reproduce, we would generally be introducing different genetics to those of natural populations, with which we would be genetically contaminating the place. Also, sanctuaries are at a high risk of a storm breaking the nets, as happened in Norway. It was not a sanctuary, but a whale research center where they studied how whale noises affected them. They had some whales in a place, in a bay closed off with a net. In a huge storm, the net broke, wrapped around one of the whales, dragged it down, and drowned it. That can happen perfectly in a sanctuary. Besides, there are a lot of things that animals are not used to, from the bottom stones to rocks that can be sharp, or sea urchins, or other type of dangerous fauna. So it represents a problem that needs to be managed and handled.
Seeing the posts or everything that is being commented on, it is also true that outside of Spain, do you believe there is another marketing or public pressure component that drives creation, or interests aimed at creating this type of locations, such as sanctuaries?
I think it sells well, and in fact it seems to me that activist organizations, 20 years ago they wanted to release all cetaceans into the sea. They don't even mention it anymore, because they know there is scientific evidence that has shown, if done, even if done in the best way we know now, animals do not survive. And they suffer in nature, through that readaptation process. So what has been found now is a very attractive alternative as an intermediate option. They will not be in captivity, but they will not be in the wild either. They will be, as they say, in semi-freedom. I don't know what semi-freedom is. One is free or not free, but there is no such thing as semi-free. You can't go out at night for a walk, and then come back in the mornings. So this is a solution that from the marketing standpoint and social perception is very good. But from the point of view of the animals, it is proving not to work.
What would you say to those people who defend sanctuaries as the only alternative to zoos or aquariums?
Well, one thing that I've been repeating a lot lately, to know where an animal is better off, you have to measure its welfare. And well-being is not an opinion. Well-being is a science. No matter how much we think that the animals will be better off in one place, that apparently to our view, from our human point of view, the context is prettier, it's more natural. What needs to be done is to measure the well-being of animals with scientific tools, and when measured with scientific tools, the well-being of animals, it's like we can truly decide and determine with certainty whether they are better off in one place or another. But in the meantime, opinions are nothing but opinions.
The curious thing, as you say, is that there is only one in the world where there are cetaceans, but there are a lot of people giving their opinion about this sanctuary issue. But the reality is that the only one, at least from the scientific standpoint, the activists from before with the activists of now, what difference do they have, for example, with this topic also about sanctuaries?
They are the same, it's just that they have changed their minds. The same ones who said before.
And why have they changed their mind?
Well, because they have realized that they can achieve. At the end of the day, what they want is to have the animals, anyone can tell. They have realized that it is much better to keep the animals where they can continue to receive donations, to do your marketing campaigns, instead of releasing them into the sea, that the day you let them go, it's over. That's the end of the whole story. In addition to because truly, scientific evidence has forced them to admit that animals cannot be released into the sea in any way. We do not have the knowledge. I'm not saying that it's not possible to reintegrate animals into nature. It's certainly possible. But today we do not have the scientific knowledge to do it. And until we have it, it's truly putting animals in danger. And this has been admitted. They have admitted that it doesn't make sense now to think about setting them free. And that is why they have sought that middle ground, because they are clearly against zoos. They will never say they are well in zoos, because it is a philosophical matter, an opinion of their personal philosophy, and therefore are looking for an alternative so that they are removed from zoos in any way.
Javier, from your scientific point of view, does taking cetaceans to marine sanctuaries put them at risk?
With the knowledge and scientific evidence we have up to this moment, it undoubtedly puts them at risk. The only long-term experiences, like those of these belugas, are clear proof. So, if that is truly going to be promoted as a solution for animals, we must measure well-being scientifically, monitor how animals are in that situation, and, if they are not feeling well, do what sea life has done, return them to a pool. Because honestly, they are better off there. In the case of these animals, obviously, trying to find a facility that is better than the one they have there, of course, because it is a temporary quarantine. But we must be honest and measure the well-being of animals and act accordingly to what science tells us.
Also, what I tell people is that if they truly want to know what is done to animals, they should come, for example, to places like Loro Park and see the animal welfare of these types of cetaceans, like the ones we have here now, not only with Morgan, but also with the new baby, with Tenno as well. I believe this is another clear example of what animal welfare is. If not, it would be very complicated for animals like Morgan to give birth to offspring, right?
Well, animal welfare experts really say that reproduction is very resilient. That is to say, there are animals that can be in poor conditions, in very poor conditions, and they continue to reproduce. So, reproduction cannot simply be considered an indicator of well-being. And say, it reproduces, then it's fine. No, you have to measure many more things. It's much more complex. Hormones need to be measured, behavior needs to be measured, the quality of the food needs to be measured. We need to measure the quality of the environment. We need to measure whether animals are optimistic or pessimistic. We must measure things that are truly very complex. To be able to evaluate the emotions of animals, that is what we propose. But professionals do that. We work and support ourselves in the knowledge we develop. Independent animal welfare experts from Spanish universities and universities around the world. They are the people who truly have the academic knowledge about well-being, and those are the ones to follow. I remember that we once had a meeting because these organizations also attack tour operators, airlines, and once someone made a very intelligent observation. In the middle of one of these meetings, where there were airlines that were being attacked, and they told, when your plane breaks down, who do you call to fix it? To an aircraft technician, or to the friends of aircraft, or to those who take photos of planes at airports? Call a specialized technician. Well, it's exactly the same. Well-being is a science. There are specialized technicians in measuring well-being. Those are the ones to trust, not in the people who simply, sometimes with very good intentions, opines from his human perspective based on what he sees, but without truly understanding the full extent of animal welfare.
Animal welfare that can be studied in zoos such as Loro Park, and where it has not been possible to do yet, is in sanctuaries.
Animal welfare that can be studied in zoos such as Loro Park, and where it has not been possible to do yet, is in sanctuaries. Yes, well, in this beluga sanctuary in Iceland, I have to admit that sea life did one thing very well. Contacting one of the leading experts in the world on cetacean welfare was a great experience. He hired her to monitor the well-being of the cetaceans from when they were in the aquarium in China, during the transport, after the transport, the adaptation and integration into the sanctuary. That is truly the way to do things, to monitor with scientific tools. What happens is that this information has not been published. If it had been such an extraordinary improvement, I'm sure they would have rushed to hold a press conference to talk about how well it had gone. But I think the evidence they have found is all to the contrary, and that is why they don't want to tell it, so it can really be measured in the sanctuaries.
And what is the evidence they have found, and do not want to tell?
Well, I don't know, because all the people who work, collaborate, or advise that sanctuary, and I know some of them very well, they sign confidentiality clauses stating that they cannot disclose anything that happens there, and then it can't be known. But one can assume it must not be good, because when they don't tell and spread it to the four winds, surely it's something that is not working too well. But as I was saying, measuring well-being is clearly done in zoos. It can be done in the sanctuaries, and it can be done in nature. And I am sure that in 10 or 15 years, when researchers of orcas in the wild, dolphins, or belugas start measuring the well-being of animals in nature, because it also needs to be measured. Because when there are 200 whale-watching boats, or maritime traffic or underwater noise, those animals may have problems and may be suffering. It needs to be assessed. I'm sure that when that happens, in 15 or 20 years, they will use the tools that we are currently developing in the zoos. because they are the scientific tools that can be used, because they will be perfectly validated, and we will have enough scientific basis to be able to use them in nature.
Last question, the one we are asking Javier Almunia, director of Loro Parque Foundation. After all we have talked about, a zoo or a sanctuary, what is currently best for the life of a cetacean?
Today, with current knowledge, a cetacean will be much better off in a good zoo, and a good zoo must be highlighted very well, because there are good and bad ones too, but it will be much better in a good zoo than in a sanctuary. Today, when science advances and we are able to adapt them, I don't know, but today the decision is clear.
Javier Almunia, director of Loro Parque Foundation. Thank you, friend.
Thank you very much.
And you already know. See you in the next podcast.